One of the things that I believe deeply, like in my soul, is that we experience the greatest joy, the greatest level of fulfillment and success when we express our multiple dimensions as human beings. So, as I've talked about before, I think on this podcast, I began to paint when I turned 40. If you're watching this, you're seeing my art behind me. Actually, I didn't even mean this, but I'm wearing my art today. So if you're watching this and if you're listening, head over to my YouTube to watch the recording so you can see the art. I spent decades telling myself that I've always wanted to paint, but I spent decades telling myself that what does that have to do with being a successful business executive or taking care of my family? So I didn't let myself because I had this narrow view that I had to focus. I had to focus all my energy on my career and my family. And it was only after I burnt out 9 years ago that I gave myself permission to paint. And I've discovered so much more joy, so much more satisfaction, but also so many things have improved in my business, in my life, because I allowed my dimension as an artist to come through. So today, my guest is someone who is such an inspiring example of the vibrancy and success that we have as our possibility when we truly tap into our different dimensions and express them in different ways. Pam Sherman is an attorney, actress, writer, and professor whose story of ditching her day job as a lawyer to pursue her dream as an actress was featured by People magazine, as it should have been. Her nationally syndicated column, The Suburban Outlaw, was published for 15 years in Gannett's Democrat and Chronicle and on the USA Today network. And today, Pam combines her dimensions and her background as an attorney, along with her creative talents, to help leaders present themselves and their work with passion through her EDGE programs. And EDGE stands for, I love this, Explore, Dream, Grow, and Excite. And I am so excited to have Pam on the podcast and to talk to her about how she has found the inspiration and also overcome all the fears that come with it for expressing her many dimensions into the world. So Pam, welcome to Reinventability.
Thank you so much for having me. And by the way, I love how your outfit is your art and it matches your art. And I was thinking, gosh, I really should have worn a jacket that matched the painting behind me. Now I'm going to do that all the time.
You totally should. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't mean that we're talking about multiple dimensions, but some
There you
power
have it.
within me knew.
I love anyone who's a visual creative because I'm not. And but I don't view that as like something that diminishes me. It means I can really appreciate the beauty of someone else's talent. And I think that's really important that we know that, my dreams might be different from your dreams, or how I reinvent myself might be different from yours, but hearing stories of others doing it in any medium can inspire you for your own.
Oh, how beautifully said. What a great way to dive in. I love it. All right, Pam, I want to go right into this giant reinvention pivot moment, attorney to actress. I mean, this is something like out of a movie. So
It really was. And it's very cinematic because zoom in on a woman lying on the floor, wailing at the ceiling, clutching a stapler in one hand that she took from the office of her law firm that had just shut down, and her really nice briefcase, leather. And she was like, I need this because this defines me and makes me who I am. And literally, I was having a dinner party that night. It was April 15th, very many years ago, and people were over, and they were good friends because as they watched me weeping on the floor, they're like, "You're gonna be fine." And I didn't know that if I was going to be fine because I had shut out my dreams, I cut them off. And I had decided I was going to be a lawyer, and that's how I was going to define myself. And a funny thing happened on the way to my secure profession. My law firm went out of business. And I guess it could have.
How long were you a lawyer? Just so we have a timeline. So how long had you been a lawyer until
I gave it
you
a
were
good
rolling
college try for about 6 years. So, and I count the law school, suffering through 3 years of law school. Although for all the lawyers out there, it's a fabulous profession and deeply important.
If it's something that connects to you.
Correct. And I really thought it would be like playing a lawyer on TV, but it's not. There's a lot more reading and writing and research and problem solving. And I was just getting to the point of my career where people were hiring me for my good judgment, for how I could help them solve their problems in creative and create complex problems in creative ways. But I had also been leading a double life, Natalie. Perhaps that's why the law firm went out of business because
Oops.
I would run from deposition to audition. And, then I'd run back to the office or I'd go off and I was doing a late night show. I was taking classes because I thought it was really important that I go back and study. And it's all the fault of a partner who said, you really should go see this play. A bunch of congressional aides do a play every year and they do it to raise money. And I didn't just go see it. I auditioned for it. So, and then got a leading part. And then partners would stop me in the hallway and say, was that you I saw on that commercial? And I'm like, yeah, no, she looks like me. I didn't know what to say. But I had been leading this double life and I decided to take the leap. And I like to say I have a husband my partner, who is really, he pushes me off, but he's the bungee cord that's attached at the other end. I'm lucky. And, I had the bungee cord of um, actually knowing what to do. I had studied acting. I went back and I went back to school because I think it's really important if you're going to reinvent yourself to learn from experts. And I also believe there's a great quote. Oh, if the stage were as thin as a tightrope, so people would be afraid to tread upon it.
Ooh.
I don't know who said it, but it was my acting teacher who said it. And I went back and I studied and I decided to become a full-time working actor in Washington, D.C. And there was plenty of work. I worked way more than my friends who had gone to theater school and were actors in New York and L.A. because there were industrial training films and there was commercials, local commercials, and there were 40 equity theaters where I could hone my craft. And it really was a working life as an actor. It was fantastic.
All right, I have so many questions.
Yep.
So, I want to back up a little bit because you talk about with such vibrancy and energy, but it was a giant shift and it was a giant move. Like, yes, your law firm had shut down, so you had to do something different. But I imagine, as someone who I've started a bunch of companies, startups, I've left secure jobs to start companies that were completely uncertain. And by the way, many of them totally failed, some of them succeeded. But the biggest thing that I find blocks people from even like exploring another dimension in themselves, I'm not talking about quitting a job. I'm talking about like taking a class in acting or in art, is fear. What if I'm
Absolutely.
terrible? What if it doesn't
Mhm.
work? So did you have that fear? So obviously you've wanted to do it for a long time. It was a dream, but did you have the fear, the doubt?
Absolutely. I still do. I think, fear that is paralyzing doesn't serve you. Anxiety that pushes you to figure out how to make it financially something you're able to do, or that has you researching. I still like to control my destiny. I'm not like, I thought that was really important. I wanted to make sure that I could do this and have a life. And I was also exploring. So if you are curious, curiosity trumps fear in my life, right? Imagination trumps fear. But I also live by a statement, and this actually came from my acting teacher, and I love it. There's scared and you do, and scared and you don't. You might as well do it because you're going to be scared anyway. And that is a mantra that I live by. I've taught my kids. I work with my clients now today doing that. Every reinvention has a modicum of fear, and if it doesn't, well, then I actually think that's not good. If you go in so overconfident or you deny your fear, you're losing the self awareness required, I think, to ultimately be successful.
Yeah. Wait, I really love that. You're scared and you do. You're scared and you don't. You might as well do because you're scared anyway. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting. It brings to mind, I've been thinking about how we think of fear, right? Because I work with a lot of leaders and people that I mentor about how do we transcend fear? Because fear is a natural brain response to anything new.
We are hardwired for it.
Exactly. And it serves us, right? There's a reason our brain gets afraid when we encounter something new because it thinks could be possible danger, and fear gets us ready. Our heart's beating faster. We have more lung capacity. So fear is a natural response. It's not possible to not have fear, but how you transcend it. And something I've been thinking about a lot is we think that what's the opposite of fear, right? We think it's the lack of fear. It's comfort. But actually, that isn't possible in life. Like, to experience that, you just have to shut yourself in a room and never leave. Because the moment I step out of my house, there's something new. So I've been thinking a lot, what's the actual opposite of fear? And something I've been thinking about, it, you said curiosity. And I've been thinking that the opposite of fear is skill. Because, if I am afraid to paint because I might suck, and my early paintings, no one's seen those, Pam, because they weren't great. But the more that I practiced, the more that I tried, the more that I explored, the more that I learned, well, I gained more skill. And so I was still afraid and I had doubt, but I had something like confidence as an outcome. So I love that expression from your theater teacher. I want to ask you, so you said something I think really important. That you wanted to have a life. You wanted to also figure out how to make it financially work. And I'd love for you to talk about that, because I think there's this like myth that if you want to pursue something creative, like forget it, you need a trust fund. And if you don't have a trust fund, or you have to be a starving artist, right? But that is actually not true. So can you talk about that aspect?
Well, I think it's a really important aspect is to have a plan. And, I mean, it's, the fear for me was not being able to pay the mortgage, right? I mean, I had a golden handcuff I'll never forget. And I just told the story the other night because I saw a lawyer I'd practiced with and I hadn't seen him in like 20 something years. And I said, I used my unemployment. When the law firm shut down, we got unemployment insurance. And I had to prove that I was getting a job. And I got paid for, a good long time. It was great, whatever however many months. And I just put every audition. It's a job. I was auditioning, but no one could say I didn't have to be looking for a job as a lawyer. Nobody in unemployment compensation. Well, maybe they're going to hear this and come after me, but that really helped. It absolutely helped. I found ways to, I didn't know it at the time, but I was ultimately going to be, figuring out ways to, turn my skill set into a business. And, I do think it's important you have to adjust your lifestyle for your dreams. It's great to say pursue your dreams, but you have to adjust your life for real life. Your dreams for real life. I always talk about that, because, real life requires, the house, keep the lights on, driving the car. And it's really, really important. So, I'm glad that you brought it up. It's funny. I do think I didn't plan that, but it was still important to me, because, I live this double life, right? In my head, the practical problem solving lawyer, which I guess is my left brain, not my right brain.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
all a little bit fuzzy. We think it's so divided, but it's not quite right.
yeah. And this creative, thinker who's like, sure, I'm going to go off and be an actor. And, by the way, being an actor, there's no job security. I would imagine my auditions. I would be so excited because my job today is going for this audition. Aren't I lucky?
What a cool mindset. So
Yeah, you have
instead
to
of like,
reset
oh my
it
God,
because
what if I
I
don't
may
get
only
it?
get to act for 2 minutes. And
Yeah.
that's my chance to act today.
But I also think it's so cool that, because again, I also think it's about mindset. Like I think it's so easy to be like, oh my God, what if I don't get it? And I'm trying to build this new life. But you had what a cool mindset. I get to act for 2 minutes
Oh,
today.
yeah, I cried every time I didn't get a part. But and then I would get the part as a lawyer in a really boring video because I could memorize 60 pages of dialogue. I mean, that's the other thing. Sometimes when your dream becomes your reality and you've reinvented yourself, you suddenly realize it's not so dreamy. I don't know. Nobody ever talks about that part,
Oh,
Natalie.
let's talk about that.
Right? So you think, oh wow, this is so great. I'm going to be an actor. And then I'll never forget. I have a part, you could see the movie The Replacements, with Keanu Reeves
I have
and,
to ask my husband. I'm so bad with names, but my husband, movies are his, I think, first love. He even
it's
like
a
writes a
great
movie blog.
old movie.
I'm
Gene
sure we've
Hackman,
seen it.
Keanu Reeves,
Yeah.
Reese Ilfen, and it's about, a strike, and they bring in all these scabs to play football, and they bring in strippers to play sexy cheerleaders. And I played the part of the shocked mom. I had to audition for the part, sitting in the stands, covering her son's face. You can find me on the trailer. I was in remember when like they would put trailers on in hotel rooms? Friends would call me up, just saw you. Every once in a while, my son will say The Replacements was on, on the movie, on the flight. And I got to watch you, Mom. But I sat in a stadium for days waiting for my shot next to cardboard cutouts because they couldn't pay all those people, to be there at the Ravens Stadium in Baltimore. And finally, I was like, I am going on I'm taking my family on vacation, and when am I going to be done? They're like, sit down. You're the actor. I'm like, this is not so dreamy. So I think you have to adjust your dreams for real life. That's number one. And number two, when your dream becomes a reality, you have to realize it's now a job, and you have
Mm.
to show up on time, be professional, and treat it with the same discipline that you would anything else that you want to be successful at, I believe.
I think that's so huge because, I work with a lot of, I mentor a lot of really incredible humans, and they're successful leaders. And often, as part of our work, they'll say, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. Right. Or I've always wanted to, they look at my art and they say, oh, I want to try art. And then I say, well, what have you done to do it? And it turns out that it's not some magic leap where it just happens. It's discipline,
It
and
is.
you make a project out of it, and there's to-do lists and there's objectives, and it kind of brings it down to earth. And I actually think it's one of really good litmus tests to make sure it is something you really want, because it's easy to fantasize and idealize. And then when we're actually in it, it's like, oh, this is for real. Do I really want this? So when it became reality for you, what did you experience? Did you have buyer's regret, or did you say, okay, I still love it, but whoo, let's readjust the mindset?
Well, I kind of got, I was in working full time as an actor, and then I had to go kicking and screaming to a town, to a different city, and had to reinvent myself again. And maybe that reset was not a bad one, because I went to a smaller town. There was one Equity Theater, which is the professional actors union, and they were doing musicals. And well, I fancy myself a singer. I know I can't do it, and they didn't cast me in anything. And I actually, and it's ironic because that artistic director is now my director of a one woman show that I performed, because I went back on stage after many years. But I thanked him, because if he had cast me, perhaps I wouldn't have reinvented myself again and taken the next step in my journey. So circumstances sometimes pull you out of it. I don't know if I would have. I always said I lamented the possibility of a phone call that might be the life-changing one. Like I auditioned for The Wire. I had like 3 callbacks for a major role on The Wire, but I had moved away and it was just really hard, and someone else got the part anyway. But I always think, oh, the one that got away. But it was okay, because it forced me to reinvent myself in a different way, to create my own path, to write my own one woman show that I got to travel around the country with, to be a, a creator as opposed to the voice of someone else's creation. And that was really a great gift.
Well, talk about that, Pam, because, and that wasn't even your last reinvention. There's many more to come. So you created this one woman show, and then, so that's like,
Not the death of my best friend. It was a comedy, Natalie. We all process our grief in different ways.
oh
Oh,
my
like I'm going to
goodness.
go on stage and just talk about it. No, it was a great journey. I had started it before we were living in Washington D.C., and we moved to a small town called Rochester, New York. And, I always say that moving to a cornfield actually widened my horizons in ways I never could have imagined, because by being taken out of the race to always accept an audition and to always to do what was the treadmill of my life at that point, ripped me away and forced me to do a reset. And I was working on this one woman show with an award-winning playwright, Colleen Sinnette Jennings, and it was called Pumping Josie: Life and Death in Suburbia, about the death of my best friend. It was a comedy. And I told her the story of how I pumped breast milk on the way to my best friend's funeral. And she's like, that's really funny. And I'm like, it kind of is. Cause what do they make that machine? Like, the attachment attaches to the cigarette lighter in your car. Like, who are they making that for? The non-smoking breastfeeding commuter? I don't really know. And she's like, well, let's write a play about that. And then I traveled back and forth. We had it produced around the country. And writing that play, I never saw myself as a playwright. Right. That was nowhere in my dreams. But I met a woman whose husband was starting a new magazine in Rochester, and turned out he had a dream to be a playwright. He said, send me some of your writing. So I sent him my play, and they're like, wow, you're really funny. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I mean, that's what I do. And he said, I need somebody who's going to create a voice and a column and write with humor, but also, tell stories that are important. You've just written a story about your dead best friend, and, what do you think about talking about living in a cornfield? And I wanted to, when you write a newspaper column, you have to write a pitch about what it's going to be about. And I wanted to write about, I wanted to upend suburbia, and that it wasn't about suburban sameness, but about interesting, irreverent people who wanted to make a difference with who they are, even though they lived in a cornfield. And that's what I got to do for 15 years. And it resonated beyond my city to other cities, and led to a book of those columns. And I really think led to my reinvention in the next phase, which is what I do now, which is working with leaders, helping them present themselves and their stories with passion, and helping them play themselves in the best possible way. Because, Natalie, there's a through line to all of this, right? It's all about sharing stories that make a connection and deeply impact your audiences, ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so first of all, I love the name of the column was Suburban Outlaw. I love it. When you and I were talking and you mentioned that, I love that so much, because I grew up in Leningrad in the former Soviet Union, which is now called St. Petersburg. It's a giant city. And then we came here as refugees to the States. And after college, I moved to New York City. So giant city. And then when our daughter Mia was 17 years ago, my husband and I moved to a suburb of Boston. We lived in Newton for 17 years. And I really needed your column, because suburbia was hard on me. We've now moved into Boston. We're doing the empty nester thing because our daughter's in college, but I really could have used your column. But I want to talk to you about what you just brought up, this through line. It's interesting. What I find, and I'm curious your thoughts on your experience. I find that in my experience, because I've gone through so many reinventions, from tech executive to consultant to venture capital to author, keynote, all these things, that the through line is only apparent in rear view mirror. Like, I didn't have the through line. And I just want to hear your thoughts, because there is a through line. Were you aware of it, or is it something that sort of makes sense when you look back?
No, I actually was aware of it. I think actors are more aware of through lines because we're given the whole script. We know what the beginning, middle, and end is, and we pick up on through lines to help us form our character. So I actually try and, when I work with my clients, have them not wait for the hindsight, or use hindsight to start connecting the dots to their through line for their own story. Because I think we do have a through line. You may have learned it in hindsight, but your through line are your values or the stories of the past. That I always say to my clients, everything you've done, everything you want to do, you've probably done before in some other way. And so, it's within you. So try and tap into that. if you didn't follow your childhood dreams, it might, what you loved about your childhood dreams might be showing up in some other way in your life and in your work. And you never stop to think about that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to investigate the through line. Maybe I do it because I'm an actor. Um, I wasn't going to, I always tell people, like, I'm not your strategy consultant. There's people who do that, right? Like, I went to law school because I can't do math. I'm not going to help you grow your company numbers, but I'm going to help you tell your story about your company. So for me, through line is a term of art that is deeply important to me and part of my skill set.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. I can't help but again reflect on my experience. It took me, I'm 48, and it took me till I was about in my early 40s after I'd burnt out, being the high tech startup executive and
Mm-hmm.
doing the thing I thought I should do and was pretty good at, not great at, good at. And I burnt out and I've written 2 books about this. I say, I don't think I burnt out because I was doing too much work. I do a lot of work now. We have a lot of capacity. I was burnt out because I was really disconnected from my true self, from my true gifts, from my true purpose. Because I work a lot now, a lot, but I don't feel burnt out. Sometimes I get overtired, right? Because I'm just doing too much. But it's like when we connect to what you're just talking about, like our values, our true purpose, our gifts, we unlock this much larger reservoir. But I think it's such a great point, Pam, to look back at our life, because like if I look back at mine, the teacher, the one, like my greatest purpose in life is to activate people to envision what's possible and actually take action to create the future self they want to be. If I look back at my life, like even as you're talking, like when you said that about Throughline, I always was trying to do it. Like in school, I was, the one who, if someone was stuck on something, I would like create some kind of pamphlet for how to do math homework better. And I was a total nerd about it. Okay. And
Where were you when I needed you?
we should have met earlier. I needed you and you needed, I was such a geek, Pam. Pam, my brilliant scientist father, who is like my closest human, I love him to death. He thought it was a fantastic idea of fun for me to compete in math Olympiads on Sundays. And in Russia, we went to school 6 days a week. So Sunday was my only day off. And in the middle of winter, literally snow to my waist. Like that's not an exaggeration because that was normal.
Yeah, right.
7
Make
in the morning.
Rochester look like Miami, right?
Exactly. And here we go to math Olympiads because that was fun, right? So I was a total math geek. But yes, you're right. Like there were a lot of places in my life where those things were piping up, what eventually kind of I had to tap into. So I think that's a really good observation. Okay, let's talk about, so you're writing this column, The Suburban Outlaw. You have your one-woman show, but then you decide it's time for the next.
Well, it really, and this is a reinvention that was born of financial need. It was 2008. Do you remember? Or was it 2009?
Oh, I
Whatever
lost the
that
company in
recession was.
2008. 2008, one of my companies went bust because it's a really good time to raise money for your startup when the banks are failing. Do not recommend, 0 out of 10. Do not recommend that experience. Yeah.
And the recession's happening and it was affecting, and my husband is an entrepreneur. I like to say he's a visionary or a nut job and the jury's still out, but he's doing good work in the world. But he said, we've got 2 children. Oh, they have to go to college. What are we going to do? I think you should go back and practice law because you still have your license. And I felt my heart grow 3 sizes too small. Like the opposite of what happens to the Grinch at the end. I was very upset about this, but I started talking to friends who were lawyers and they said, I think you could come back, but you'd act like a partner. And I really think you're not, you wouldn't be one. And so it's not good. What if, you could teach my lawyers to do what you do? And I'm like, what do you mean? And one of them said, the way you talk to people and get them to share their stories. Because none of my lawyers, the next generation, they've got their heads down. They're really good at doing the work, but they need to, zoom out and make connections and really understand that how they show up makes a difference in building trust and fill in the blank of all the things that happen with your presence. And it occurred to me, I was like, wait, I did that. Because when I was in that People magazine article, I'd gotten a call from the head of training at the Antitrust Division in the Department of Justice saying, "Can you help me make my lawyers more interesting?" I'm like, "No, I can't." They're pretty interesting now. Anyway, I said, yeah, I wish I could. But then I started thinking about it. And I thought, well, what do actors do that make you believe them? Because ultimately, we are the messengers for every message we put out. You know, you think that it's all about your content, but you are the presenter. You're the voice of your client. You might be the voice of your product, the voice of your advocacy, and how you show up matters. And so I started creating these seminars and doing that in my spare time as an actor. I said, you know what? I think I have a curriculum that I can bounce back into, and let's do this. Make sure you can still hear me, Natalie? Yes. Good. Okay. Because it's freezing up, but now it's back. But it was so much fun to dust. There we are. You see me again?
Yes. Do you want to just back up to what you're saying when you started to freeze?
Please. Yeah, why am I freezing?
Yeah.
If I get rid of my, can I hide my self view? No, there's no way to do that.
I
You know
don't
what I
think
mean?
so.
Like they
Let me
don't.
just make a note
Okay,
for editor.
it's okay.
31.
All right, good.
Ooh,
Sorry about that. Everything started
okay.
freezing
So
up.
I'm going to ask you. Okay. I'm going to ask you that again, and we'll just cut it. So then let's talk about your next. So then you had your next reinvention, which led to you creating your own business. How did that come about? You're acting, you're writing your column.
Living a creative life and raising small children, and the financial crisis of 2008 hits, and all of a sudden my husband says, well, you're still licensed as a lawyer and we got to send those kids to college, so why don't you go back and practice law? And I felt like, you know, the Grinch when his heart gets 3 sizes too big. I felt mine was shrinking. Every time I met with a friend who was a lawyer and I said, I really want to be a lawyer, they're like, no, you don't. But could you teach my lawyers to do what you do? And I said, what do you mean? You know, the way you talk to people. And I had done that for the Department of Justice, for the Antitrust Division, because they'd read about me in People magazine. It's amazing how that press, you know, actually does make a difference. And I dusted off the curriculum and I realized that what I wanted to do was to help people bridge. I now know it's really about bridging the believability gap and helping them develop the confidence to understand that the messenger matters. You have to believe in yourself and you have to get others to believe in you too. That's what lawyers do when they're arguing a case. That's what you're doing when you're pitching a product. That's what you're doing when you're pitching yourself, even for an interview. And that's what you're doing when you're having a difficult conversation with a colleague at work. Is you're building trust, you're building connection, and you're using you to do it. And that's exactly what actors do. We take you guys on a journey where you suspend your disbelief to believe in the world that we've created for you. And I can't tell you how much fun. All of a sudden, I had the chance to travel all over the world, working with leaders from places as far flung, I like to say, as Saudi Arabia and Cincinnati, Milwaukee and Morocco, and every place in between. And leaders understand that how they show up matters and that they have to be the best actors they can be in order to realize their dreams, realize their vision, and ultimately get others to follow them.
So I want to ask you about that. You know, I do a lot of work with leaders. I do a lot of speaking to companies and to leaders. And one of the things that people find really challenging often is to express themselves authentically. In fact, just the mention of that, I just finished, I have this 7-week training that I do. It's called Leading Through Change. And I just finished a cohort of that. And just like the moment I mention, let's talk about emotional openness and authenticity, it's like, hard no. Can we move on? Can we do next topic? What? No, I already do it, you know. And it's this hard thing, right? Because again, there's fear because we have to be seen as human, as who we are. And that's scary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you and the listeners don't do this, but if you Google images of me from, like, if you just Google Natalie Kogan, you look back like 10 years when I was running startups, you get a lot of images of, like, I call it my positive and confident leadership face. If you're listening and not watching, crossed, it's like if you Google stock photos of leadership, that's what you get, crossed arms,
Even in high
smile.
heels, climbing mountains.
That's right. Yeah. The thing is, I genuinely thought that is what I'm supposed to do as a leader. This is what people need from me. They need me to always be positive and confident and show the way. And oh my God, what is this authentic communication? What is this being truthful about who I, no. And so, for me, my path to learning to be, I've always been a great storyteller. That's one thing that I have. But my path to being really authentic, again, it was only after I burnt out that I couldn't fake it anymore. And so I started to open up more, and I realized, wow, there's a lot more trust, and people start to sharing their stories. And I am so happy I don't have to be wearing this mask all the time, because
Well,
the
that
mask.
there was the source of your burnout, aside from the fact that you probably, there was that disconnect, and you said it before. It's interesting. I opened the book I'm writing with the story of my ill-fitting suit. When I was a lawyer, I literally wore a suit that, the shoulder pads were out to here and like a cameo at my neck, so that everyone would know what I was, a woman and not a linebacker. I don't know. And, and I really felt like I was like the whole thing was ill-fitting, and I was playing a part that, didn't feel real to me. I cried a lot. Like it's kind of amazing. We opened this with the story of me crying on the floor, with a stapler, but that door was shut a lot just on regular days, with me crying, not feeling like I was being myself. When you are playing a role that doesn't feel real, that isn't believable, that's the very essence of the believability gap. And it just is uncomfortable. It takes, you feel like you're not in your own skin. I was reading about Naomi Osaka, the championship, the tennis player.
Yeah.
And she was saying, I don't feel like I'm fitting in my body right now, and I have to get used to my body right now. That's like a metaphorical, it's a metaphor for what happens when you feel disconnected to your authentic self, and when you don't share it out loud. And trust me, your audience won't trust you, because they will feel that disconnect.
Yes.
So I actually love working with engineers and scientists and lawyers and people for whom I'm truly terrifying, right? Because they scare me, because I don't know what they know. And I love opening their eyes to the fact that, it's, vulnerability, authenticity for authenticity's sake, Natalie, isn't useful. I believe that authenticity that is defined by your values, like that gives you a foundation. And that's why I really have tried to switch it to believability, because the definition of acting that I use is Sanford Meisner. And it all stems, you can tell your father, from Stanislavski, in Russia. But it's the ability to live truthfully in given imaginary circumstances. And
Ability to live. I really want to get this, because I think it's beautiful. It's the ability to live truthfully in imaginary circumstances.
And we are all trying to live truthfully in the circumstances that we're in. And so when you don't use your own voice, I always tell people, you don't need me to help you find your voice. You have one. You just need to use it. When you don't, when you think you have to follow a script of someone else's making on your career path, when you are trying to show up and don't feel like it's emotionally connected to who you are or will make a difference. I always say, it's really, we actors learn, it's not about us, it's about your audience. You, the audience, are most important. And if you're not giving to your audience, if you're not truly living truthfully in your circumstances, take away the word imaginary.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I want to ask you a question. In every segment, every podcast, we have a listener question segment. And I had a question from one of our listeners for you, but I'm going to ask you a different one just based on what you said. But before that, I just have to share with you, because I think you'll really appreciate this and our listeners. So because my father loves theater so much, when I was young, so in Russia, the way it worked is you sort of did one activity as a kid and you did it like semi-professionally.
Yeah.
It wasn't, nobody cared if you were having fun. Like you sort of became semi-professional. So,
And this is why all those figure skaters were so great for so many years, and gymnasts, right?
well, let's talk about figure skating, because I really wanted to figure skate. Well, my parents put me in a figure skating thing and I went to figure skating. But I didn't make it because after about a year, they told me like, you can't, your body isn't made for it. You're under spinning. You're not Olympic material. I was like 5. They're like out.
Wow.
Okay. So, I was a dancer. And I danced with this kids group, called Ensemble Youth, like youth. And we performed in dance halls like Carnegie Hall. That was my thing, like 4 hours a day practice, 4 times a week, all that stuff. But my dad really loved theater. So he also wanted me to go to theater school, like an activity, not full time. So I just have to share this with you because I think you'll love this. And so I went. I wasn't into it, but okay, had to go. So he was like, okay, just go for like a year and then you can quit. Okay. So I'll never forget this, Pam. One of the first skits, one of the first practice things that we had to do, I remember it like, thank you for this, because I haven't, memories are back in our head. Like I haven't had this active memory in probably 25 years. We had to have this skit where you're sewing something and you accidentally sew yourself to a chair, like you sew a piece of clothing to a chair. And that was the thing we had to do. And it's funny because I'm a good actress. I can put on an act. Just ask my parents what I put on. But for whatever reason, I remember I really struggled. Like I really got into like the mechanics of like, how is this needle? It's imaginary, right? I'm not holding a thread. And I just have this clearest memory when it came my turn, and you're on stage, the class and the teacher, they're sitting. And I was just like, it was pathetic. I mean, it was a pathetic attempt at sewing myself to the chair.
And as a result, you never sewed again in your life, right? Bring everything to the tailor.
I did not
It's
act.
so funny because the exercise is really about being believable in that particular doing, right? And the irony of that is, I have to iron on stage in the role that I play in a one-woman show that I now take around the country. It's the story of an incredible dreamer named Irma Bombeck, who really was an iconic columnist also. So, we have a lot in common. But she irons while she talks. And I didn't know how to iron. And my director I had to practice ironing. In fact, I'm opening next week in, I open around the country. So I'm going to Denver and Des Moines, and I need to practice my ironing because you have to believe that I'm ironing while I'm talking to you. And believe me, my husband has wrinkle-free shirts. I gave one to my director because I'm like, listen, buddy, I don't know how to iron. I'm giving you a wrinkle-free shirts. What is that?
Oh my God, I love that. Didn't even think about that. Wait, before I ask you the listener question, is the iron on stage? No.
No, that would be really. Thank goodness, because I would be burning myself.
Yeah, because I'm like, wait, because I've seen, the previews and you are there ironing. I was like, okay, it's not actually on. All right, here is the listener question that I do want to ask you. And this is actually something that I got in an email, not even related to the podcast, but you're the perfect person to answer this. And
Okay.
It's from a woman, Alicia, who is a really successful executive. And she has been at her company for many, many years, manages a large team of people, and has recently been rising to a place where she's being asked to speak, both to the board of directors, sometimes to customer conferences. And she literally wrote to me, she's like, Natalie, I think I'm going to quit before I have to do this and she's like, I'm great speaking to my team. She's got a giant team. She's like, something happens in me when I get in front of the board or the customer team. And she's like, I don't know what it is. I feel confident in my work. I don't usually doubt myself. So you feel like the perfect person to help Alicia, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners, what would be your advice?
Well, in that regard, first of all, have Alicia call me. Okay. I've
Yes.
got you. But in a quick answer, Alicia's thinking about herself and she's not thinking about her audience.
Yes.
I always say when we become paralyzed with fear, that's about us. And she needs to remember the reason she probably speaks so well with her team is she cares deeply about them and she engages them, she empowers them, and she forgets that the board of directors, they're people too. And she has to find, and I always say about audiences, visualize your ideal audience. So she has to like literally, it's that ridiculous thing about, audiences being naked.
Oh God, I
Ooh,
hate that
who came
advice.
up with that? Like, ew, I don't want to see them in their underwear. But I do think when you're practicing to visualize your ideal audience as a member of your team who appreciates you, or always speak to the person who's shaking their head and smiling at you. Don't speak to the guy folding his arms. He may just be cold. It's just
Mm.
because what happens is you start thinking about what's he thinking, you get into this loop and you're not thinking about impact, your purpose for being there, and the importance of building trust with your audience, with who you are. So I hope that helps. But
Yeah.
would it surprise you to know that I get nervous backstage every night?
Actually, no, because it's interesting. So, first of all, I love your advice, and I was nodding. If you're listening, my head's been like I'm like one of
Good.
those dolls who just not because. So I speak professionally. I get on a lot of very giant stages, and I am a freak of nature in that I don't get nervous. And so I am like the 2% of the population, because what is it? 98% of adults have a fear of public speaking.
Yes. Fear
But
greater than death.
that's right. It's the number one fear. But so I don't get nervous. But when I started to do it, I would get shaky. And the something that I developed, and this is something I still do, even though, even as my speaking career has flourished, and this is something that I do professionally, before I go on stage, like when I'm standing backstage, the last thing that I think about is I think about there's one person in the audience who really needs to hear what I have to say. They may not know it, but they really need to hear it. And I am here to help that person. And I speak, of course, I speak to the whole audience. But in my mind, I'm there to help that one person. And that's advice that I give leaders that I work with. And what you and I are talking about is this, what's called the pro-social mindset, right? When we get out of how will people judge me, which, it's interesting. I'm thinking back to like being on that stage, fake sewing myself to the chair. This could be reconstructed memory, but I have this feeling that I was very obsessed with like, am I doing this needle thing correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Which is me focus. It wasn't, am I helping my audience feel like they're in a room with me and I'm sewing myself to a chair? And that's really funny, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
that's funny. I think it was supposed to be funny. And so the pro-social mindset is when we think about how what we're doing impacts others. And there's tons of research, right? That I posted this on LinkedIn this morning of like, if you just focus on how can I contribute instead of how can I get this done or what's in it for me, when we're in a pro-social mindset, we're more motivated, there's more trust. We're actually able to tap into our best abilities and qualities. So I love that perspective. And, it's just to like wrap and come full circle. I wanted to ask you to like connect it all. Are you grateful? Are you happy that you had your career as a lawyer? Is it something that you
Oh, I
appreciate?
don't, I don't regret. I don't think I would believe in regrets. There's very few things I regret except maybe like the ice cream I, had last week that I'm like, I shouldn't have had that, but then actually there's a line that Irma says, uh, who wants to live life with regrets? Think of all the women on the Titanic who waved off the dessert cart.
Brilliant.
My favorite line in the whole play. But I will say, I don't think I could be who I am today, having not had that journey. I don't think the clients at the level that I work with would trust me. I think that that lawyer who was being hired for her good judgment back then has only grown in her good judgment in her work. as a writer, an actor, and now a leadership coach and consultant. So no, I actually think being a lawyer really does help me. And I can also tell you when you need to call a lawyer. That's, like, this is not legal advice, I have to give the,
Yeah,
but,
yeah,
I do think you should call a lawyer on this,
yeah,
for XYZ.
yeah,
And I'm happy to talk to them on your behalf so that you ask the right questions and you don't waste their time and yours.
yeah. Yeah, but no, I love that perspective because I think that, people often ask me, do I regret that I spent 20 years in a career that, wasn't quite aligned, that it took me this long. And I don't think we get to where we are without doing the things we did before that, meaning there isn't some linear right one path for us to follow, right? And we're supposed to find it. I think that reinvention is this ongoing process,
Yes.
right? And everything you've done, like just having this conversation and thinking about all the different roles you've played, pun intended, um, they all connect, and they all were part of like you being here and doing what you love doing now. And I think that's actually a great place to I think it's a really good point to make. And I love that that's your perspective, because I hear a lot of people say, wow, I'm too old to make a change, or I should have done it earlier, or
Yeah,
I
a
really
career is a
regret.
long time thing. People think of it. I mean, I know what is the statistic that we're going to have way more than one career in a lifetime or one job in a lifetime. So paying attention to that, I think, is important. I like to say a dream is a story that just hasn't been written yet, so you get to write it. But the stories of the past illuminate our path to the future. So all those stories that make you will illuminate your path to the future. And frankly, you needed to live through them in order to be at the point where you are today.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great place to end, Pam. We could talk for a long time. I'm really grateful for your insights and your humor and the vibrancy with which you share your story. It's incredibly inspiring. I knew a lot of it, but hearing you talk about it, like my brain is buzzing with all kinds of like new dimensions that you've opened. So thank you for sharing yourself with us so generously. And to our listeners, if you heard something that has resonated with you, rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. It helps other people discover it and benefit from it. If you have a friend in your life who you think could really benefit from this conversation, be an awesome human and share it with them. And we will, of course, put the link to learn more about Pam and her leadership work and her one-woman show and her book in the show notes. It's all on her website. It's completely brilliant. I hope I get to see the one-woman show one day. And with that, Pam, thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, thank you for being part of another episode of Reinventability.